The St. Louis Rams go on the road to take on the Tampa Bay Bucs on Sunday. BETDAQ currently has Tampa installed as a 3-point favorite in this game. 44.5 is the total. And I think this is a very interesting game. I know these two teams are out of the playoffs. St. Louis at 6-7-1, Tampa at 6-8. But from a bettor's perspective, it's an interesting game because the line here is Tampa -3. When I first saw that line, I said, oh, that's low. Boy, a spot to jump on Tampa because St. Louis, they are what they are. A pretty good defense, very limited on offense. And, hey, I like the Rams. I understand what people see in the Rams. I've backed the Rams 5 times this season and had won the first 4 times before going to the well once too often. I liked them last week to beat Minnesota at home, but they lost that game. That was a big loss, dropped them out of playoff contention. But so anyway, I see what people see in the Rams. They have a good defense, 9th in the NFL in total yards allowed. They're especially good in the secondary. I love that cornerback tandem, Cortland Finnegan and the rookie Janoris Jenkins. But again, very limited on offense. I mean, they are what they are. They're much worse on the road than they are at home. And Tampa Bay, throughout most of this season, has been one of the very best offenses in the NFL. They're currently 10th in points scored, but that's a little skewed because they were shut out last week. They've been right around the top 5 for most of the season, a very balanced offense. And you would expect them to be more than a 3-point favorite here, at least I would. Even though they lost 41-0 on the road last week in New Orleans. I understand that. But if you watch that game, Tampa, they moved the ball well early. A couple of bad turnovers. Things really snowballed. I know there's no excuse for losing 41-0 and getting shut out by the worst defense in the NFL, which the New Orleans Saints were, at least statistically, heading into that game. But I view that game, or at least viewed that game, as kind of an outlier. But then when I was taking a look at this game, I realized, it hadn't hit me. That's 4 straight losses now for Tampa. They're on a 4-game losing streak. The last loss, obviously, 41-0. And so, is this Tampa team falling apart? Are they going the way of last year's Tampa team? You remember that last season when Raheem Morris was the coach, Tampa lost their final 10 games and they were 1-9 against the spread in those games. It was widely viewed that they quit. They laid down on Raheem Morris. And Greg Schiano came in this year, ran off a couple of guys from that team, even though they were productive guys. Guys like Kellen Winslow, the tight end, who led the team in receptions last year. Brian Price, defensive tackle. Earlier this season, Aqib Talib, their best cornerback, who's now playing with New England. Schiano didn't like the attitude of those guys, so he's turned things around in Tampa. I mean, the Bucs throughout most of the season have been a really tough team. They outperformed expectations. Nobody expected them to fight for a playoff spot this season, but that's exactly what they had done, at least until the last couple of weeks. But again, now a 4-game losing streak. And the reason I guess it didn't hit me that they'd been playing so poorly is because it started innocently enough. I mean, they lost by 1 to the Atlanta Falcons, who have been tied with Houston for the best record in the NFL throughout most of the year. They still are. Then they lost on the road to the Denver Broncos by 8 points. No shame in losing to Denver. Now, they were way down in that game. They sort of came back. The final score not really indicative of the way the game was played. Then they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles at home. Now, that was a surprising result. I was actually back in Tampa that day. I remember they were either a 9 or a 10-point favorite, somewhere around there. Philadelphia has been a terrible team, as we all know, the second half of the season. Tampa took a 21-10 fourth quarter lead in that game. Philadelphia scored 2 touchdowns in the last 4 minutes of that game to pull off a shocking 23-21 win. They scored on the last play of the game. It was in Tampa. It knocked Tampa out of playoff contention. No doubt a gutting loss. And then the 41-0 loss to New Orleans last week. So do you see where I'm going with this? Has this team, has the heart been ripped out of this team? Have they now laid down on Greg Schiano like they did? Remember, even though there's a lot of new faces, there's been some turnover in this roster, there's a lot of the same guys. A lot of the same guys that were part of the 10-game losing streak to close out the season last year when they were 1-9 against the spread. And you can say one thing about the Rams. This team has not given up. The St. Louis Rams with Jeff Fisher, we know Jeff Fisher's teams in Tennessee, they were known to be tough. They didn't always have explosiveness on offense, but they always had good defense. They seemed to always be able to run the football until the very end in Tennessee. I seem to remember a shutout loss, 50-some-odd-0 to the New England Patriots or something like that. And Jeff Fisher ended up getting fired, of course, at the end of that season. Until the very end, Jeff Fisher's teams were tough, and this St. Louis Rams team, I believe, is still playing hard. Can we say the same about the Tampa Bay Bucs? Because I believe Tampa is better than St. Louis. I really do. And if they respond, if they haven't laid down, then I believe they're going to cover 3 points here. And I think this is going to be a referendum on Greg Schiano. It's why I think this is such an interesting game. I said in the beginning, even though this is a game between two teams who aren't going to make the playoffs, I've gone on and on this season about how I think Greg Schiano should be mentioned for Coach of the Year because the Bucs were so bad last year. And even though there were some key additions like Vincent Jackson, the wide receiver who was brought in from San Diego, Doug Martin certainly the rookie running back, by and large, it's a lot of the same roster. It was so bad last year, and Schiano's done a great job. But now they've lost 4 straight games. They were just shut out 41-0. Has he done a great job? Or has he lost this team just like Raheem Morris did last year? I think we're going to find out a lot about that this Sunday. Now, I still have faith in Greg Schiano. I still think Tampa is going to respond and play hard in this game, which is why I do like Tampa -3 here. But I'll tell you what, I don't like it as much as I did when I first saw the line. I first saw this line, I said, oh, Tampa -3, an opportunity there. Again, the Rams are not as good on the road as they are at home. But the more I've looked at this game and the more I've thought about it, I can certainly see where it's coming from here. People might think this is a little fishy. People might be too quick to jump on Tampa. You never know. This team, they might not be going in a good direction. They might have laid down losers of 4 straight, getting blown out in their last game, losing to Philadelphia the game before. We shall see. I think we'll know for sure after this Sunday. As of now, I still have faith in the Bucs and Greg Schiano. I like them -3 on Sunday against the St. Louis Rams.